Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artists Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artists Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Forty with another episode of the In Focus podcast, brought to you by the Artist Index. And hopefully we won't have any technical issues. It seems like Xfinity went out on us about a third of the way into the last time that we tried to do this. So without further ado, we're going to have our guests introduce themselves again and spell their name again. And then we can start again.
Great. Yes. It'll work this time. It will. My name is Ymelda Rivera Laxton, and I am the Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art and Community Projects at the New Bedford Whaling Museum. That is Ymelda Rivera, and Laxton is Laxton.
I'm going to go back to your title.
Yeah.
So if you could break that down for us, because to some people, that's just a bunch of mush. They have no idea what the heck that means.
It is a long title, that is
yes.
for sure.
You don't answer the phone that way, do you?
I try not to. And I'll give people some time, and then I take a lot of, a few breaths in that title. Sometimes I like to say, to make it easier, that basically what that means is that I work with living people. That I work with people in communities today and artists working today in the region, and so that's basically where the contemporary art and then the community projects come in. And the museum has a number of community advisory boards or committees, and so I am a staff member who is a liaison to those committees and kind of the work they do and guidance they might have around some of our exhibitions and programming here at the museum.
Okay, excellent. That's really, really good. And yeah, the term contemporary, because one of the biggest challenges, believe it or not, with the Artist Index is when you're writing the content. And the closer you are to something, I always tell people it's like the tip of your nose. Can you see it? It's very difficult to focus on that.
Sure.
And when we speak about and also being a painter, artists, people who have not, they somehow shirked the requisite art history course,
right? Yeah.
In freshman year. But when you say contemporary, right away they go to modern. It's like, well, you're half right. What does modern mean? New. Well, yeah, because it's now, So
right.
that one, we can explain away. But then when you want to talk about, because part of our agenda, which comes from Mary Jean Blasdale, who wrote the seminal Artists of New Bedford, a biographical dictionary, is to continue that work. In fact, I'm going to be meeting with her next week. We've spoken several times on the phone, and she's like absolutely thrilled that we're doing this. And like, wow, I mean, you're our inspiration. We almost need like a little dashboard, Mary Jean Blasdale.
Yeah, no, I have yet to meet her, but I look forward to it. I love her work, and everything's been really helpful in getting to know the museum.
I will tell her that. But the problem is like we have these, for lack of a better term, dead people. And they are historical artists. But when you say historical, people think, oh, they're like important. Well, they may be important historical people, but they're just I don't know any other term to interject in there. So
sure, right, yeah.
You pull the plug out of the jug on that
one. Yeah, well, it's true because I feel like anytime you say contemporary, a lot of people go to a certain type of art that's been made recently, or a conceptual abstract art. There is a certain idea of what that might look like, instead of just thinking about the idea that it is made by someone who is living. And so then it comes from a very certain perspective and time, right? And so I feel like that's one one place where you have to start, just, I guess, educating is the word, letting people know what that means. And then understanding why that perspective and that contemporary artists, why that might be important in a museum, in the New Bedford Whaling Museum, or in a museum that also has historic collections, right? Kind of trying to talk through that relationship and why it's important. There's artists who have these wonderful signs, like I don't even remember what his name is, a wonderful sign that said all art was once contemporary, right? Yes. So in thinking about how the museum collected contemporary artists at a time when they were still living, so there's been a history of that through time, even though now, they're dead.
Well, that's a really good point. That's actually an excellent point. And it's like one of those tip of your nose kind of things again, because a lot of these guys in the collection, a lot of these people, artists were alive at the time. And now we're like, oh, they're historical artists. Well, yeah, because they're no longer here.
Right. Well,
and they didn't collect them another time.
Right, exactly. Yeah.
Before we were rudely cut off by technology, I hope somebody didn't hit a pole or whatever. And
I know.
The last time I had this happen, I wasn't on a Zoom, but we kept getting these outages. It was a squirrel that chewed through the wires and it was wreaking havoc. And they finally figured out when all else fails, look for squirrels, We were talking about indigenous art, or to use the common erroneous and monolithic term, Indian art, because indigenous First Nation peoples, they're not a monolith. I mean, we have 50 states. We had confederations. We had, everywhere you went, there was people just think of tribes. Well, there were tribes within confederations. And
does
that get difficult?
It does. I feel like that's kind of one of the, I don't know if it was myths or ideas that you have to dispel when you're working in museums or in teaching people about, Native communities throughout the United States. And that's just the United States, right? That's not even considering indigenous communities around the world, which we have collections from indigenous communities from around the Pacific in our collection. But there's over 500 at this point, I hope it's more, 500 or so federally recognized tribes. But there's more beyond that. I mean, that's so many people, and that's so many different cultures and different groups throughout just the United States, not even including Canada or Mexico or South America, not the Americas. So so it's a lot of different kinds of traditions and perspectives and artworks. And something that also comes up in this conversation, I feel like quite a bit, and that we're also working through, is when people think of the term for art or contemporary, like understanding what art is and how many times there's been this kind of hierarchy that's formed, where perhaps something is considered a folk art or craft and not fine art or artwork, or like, and who makes that distinction, or understanding that that distinction is made within this kind of society that was built by non-Indigenous people at this point.
White men.
So understanding like how that, where you're starting from, and understanding creation and craft and art and perspective is the first place to look before actually like coming into a space and seeing something for the first time. So that's also something we kind of explore, talk about here and in museums, other museums.
Yeah, I find, I lived in Portugal for a year, and I don't know if I'm describing this correctly, but it's more heterogeneous there. People know who they are. They are very proud of their histories. For example, my DNA test revealed that I'm 99.8% Iberian. I'm an indigenous. I have an indigenous bloodline. I don't know what these Iberians look like, how they lived, or whatever. I'm assuming it was pre-Roman. one guy, when I was over there, who was, and that's another thing, they're very well versed in their history there, said, "Have you ever heard of Cheddar Man?" And I said, "Yeah, I have heard of Cheddar Man." He said, "Oh, well, you know the story of Cheddar Man. In the town of Cheddar, where cheddar cheese comes from, they found bones in a cave, and they decided they were going to try to get some DNA extracted from those bones. And then he's like, wow, wouldn't it be cool if we like tested people in the town to see if they're related to the bones in that cave?"
Right.
They found out these people haven't moved in thousands of years. They just
Wow. Yeah.
just stayed stuck in one spot. So he said, "I think you're like the Portuguese cheddar man." The other issue is, well, with the museum primarily, because I mean, you are an employee there, and you know, a curator there, and you have a big row to hoe, as they say, because you are pretty much in the beginning phases of this incredible embracing of, going beyond the walls. My sister-in-law, when she came from Detroit for a visit, the first time she saw the Whaling Museum, was blown away. Now, she is a phenomenal genealogist. I mean, her family, their history is unbelievable. From enslaved people all the way to the 10 percenters. And she was absolutely astounded of what the museum offered. It wasn't one dimension. It was. Now, when you mentioned community in your title, I believe,
Yep.
Does this also mean, well, you've got that case in the lobby of the museum where you showcase an artist a month. I've been fortunate to have my work showcased there, the is that going to grow? That's what I'm stumbling for. I mean, I know Don Wilkinson is writing an article right now for the New Bedford Light.
He is, yes. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is yes. I think there's been a commitment over the past, we've had a lot of staff changes, but I think you can point like the past 20 years to trying to create exhibitions that are more inclusive.
Yes.
And that it is in all realms, because we are an interdisciplinary museum, right? It's right in our title, right? We are art, history, science, and culture, right? And so all of these, and so we are kind of a place where we explore that sweet intersection of all of those things, right? In society, in our collections, here in New Bedford. And so I feel like understanding that nuance and all the different people from different communities here in New Bedford and beyond that kind of contributed to this story. So in art locally, also in the sciences, and then in just the cultural communities of the area. I feel like building spaces where you can see that more clearly in the museum has been a focus, and then also having artists, local artists, again, with that idea where how sometimes it feels like an easy way for people to access history or access something that maybe doesn't seem like it has anything to do with them, or maybe it's not my history, or I don't understand what does whaling possibly have to do with anything that I've ever experienced in my life. And sometimes I feel like contemporary artists or perspectives who kind of, work through those ideas and maybe reframe things or take inspiration from things in history can make exhibits or artworks that make that history more accessible to people, or make it feel like, oh, I can see myself in this, or I understand why this is part of the story of the area, right? And so that's why it seems like expanding upon having contemporary artists in the museum. Again, artwork, things that like fit into our mission still, right? why that's so important, and why we're going to kind of lean into that in how we explore the history of the area, the history of whaling, and then history of conservation and kind of ocean ecologies and climate change now.
Yeah, I mean, the seaweed show was obviously something.
Yeah,
I think
exactly.
that really set a lot of people back. Like, what?
Right? Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
that stuff I walk over on the beach.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know?
definitely. Having that understanding of like really how integral that is to this local community, and then the
Mhm.
connections you have with with those other the explorations in France and England, that
Right.
kind of triangle that the exhibition explored, and it's great, right? That's kind of what you would hope for in a museum, is that maybe sometimes people go in expecting a very certain type of thing or history or story, and maybe they can leave understanding how that is it, but there's more to the story, right? Or it's a little more nuanced, or how this other, how scrapbooking, how women's like how these certain kind of activities are directly related to this idea, this kind of exhibit they maybe want to go see.
Yeah, yeah. And then as you're speaking, I'm thinking, okay, um, everyone is culpable of building silos in every society, in every culture, and so on and so forth. And for the longest time, I feel, it's only my opinion, the opinions expressed on this that disclaimer, is that okay? Well, the Whaling Museum only does this, and then the New Bedford Art Museum only does this, and then this other place only does this, and it's like,
Right.
that's sort of whacked.
Yeah.
And then, well, one time we had CVPA in town, but that's a subject a lot of people just don't want to touch with a 10-foot pole anymore.
Right. Yeah.
But the museum, Roy Rosso, his show, I've known him for like this on Zoom and everything else like that, and I've got to go see him in person. His work. I did a podcast with Roy. The work is exquisite. It's a jewel. It
really is.
The jewels, and that is a wonderful thing to do. Are there going to be more of those exhibits where you've got the contemporary, living, breathing artists in the creative community in the South Coast represented in the museum?
Yes, no, most definitely. And we're so lucky to be organized in a way where we have an exhibition schedule going into, all the way into 2026. And that Center Street Gallery is a place where right now we do have a lot of contemporary artists slated in there who will be talking about, a myriad of things, between like the sound of water and the environment around you. So some sound installation artists who are also visual artists who work in the kind of environmental sciences realm, to artists who are really thinking about kind of the extractive kind of practices of society over the past 100 years, and then that effect on indigenous survivance, and then traditional ways of knowing a place. And then we have artists who are exploring kind of literary themes of Moby Dick, right? And so I feel like it is a whole, there is a space here for that contemporary thought and for that kind of discussion that we hope will be ongoing. But outside of just having, I think something that we're all, the curatorial staff, Naomi, of course, you've met, I think there is going a focus on also integrating that contemporary art in all the galleries, right? So that way, it's not that you're in the Bourne building with the wonderful ship, and that you only learn about that, right? So but you learn about that, but then there are a myriad of contemporary artists who might have works that speak to to shipbuilding or to the whaling industry or to legacies here in New Bedford. And then, the histories of Dartmouth colony, all of these kinds of areas in the museum are all places where you could have kind of a conversation between contemporary art and then again the historic collections and stories that we're telling. And so we're hoping to kind of, we're looking at our spaces and trying to understand how we can continue to, like I said, integrate that contemporary perspective into the museum throughout, right? Outside of one gallery or one program.
You hit on something, well, several things, which is like, wow, it looks like a great agenda that's coming up. But when you're talking about Moby Dick, I think Moby Dick and Melville have evolved. And one of the things that I always used to joke, born and bred in New Bedford, Massachusetts, I might as well take a bite of the Melville apple. Yeah. I did. And oh my God, what a drug. Because all of a sudden I started to see things or feel things that I thought, this can't be right. I started doing some research like, oh my God, it is right. And which led me to Douglas and Melville anchored together side by side. Mm-hmm. And then I just read something recently about Moby Dick is now being recognized as the second Uncle Tom's Cabin. There are
right. There's so many.
Moby Dick is an onion to quote Shrek. There's a lot of layers in there, right?
Right.
And I really, I bounced around stuff, but it'll give me that thing that my friend Peter Zorn. I don't know if it's going to show up on whatever. We talked about Peter Zorn and the University of Miami and his Southwest Indigenous collection with the Black Maria pottery and such. And he told me about, he reframed Indigenous people in a completely different way. And because it's really not taught that way, Washta, Wounded Knee, and so on and so forth. And looking at people who were totally subjugated and so on and so forth. But to see the concept of Melville taking from freely borrowing from Douglas and Douglas freely borrowing from Melville is an absolute collaboration that just really, the person who finds the receipt from the cafe where they sat and had coffee or a meal together is going to be like this hero. Because they were always, like, the proof is so weird. They're in the same place at the same time, and all of a sudden there's this cross-pollination of a speech to a book to a speech. It's just absolutely amazing.
Right. Yeah. I think that kind of that underlying idea of cultural exchange or of this is something that has been explored definitely at the museum, but it's something also that we exploring, what an impact it was for people at a certain time to meet each other. Because of our collection and who we are, many times that's from the perspective of the whalers who were traveling in their work and what they, the people that they met and how there are exchanges of information and that happen, and kind of exploring like what that looks like, and the negative impacts of these encounters. That's just definitely something that that we will continue to do and look into.
And it's just so much to talk to you about to try to fit in here. But while I was in the last couple of years, I've got a friend who wrote a book, it's considered by him a seminal book on the fishing heritage of Portugal. He's there's a copy in all the major nautical museums there, and the amazing, the influx of the Portuguese into this area that affected whaling, the fishing fleet. I mean, Figueira da Foz, where I lived, half of the fishing fleet at one time in, out of New Bedford was from that locale. So I'd love to see something happen with that. And then there's I met Gil Perry, who's on the he refers to it as a subcommittee, but Paulina Arruda from WJFD just calls it a committee. So it's
Portuguese Advisory Committee is
the Portuguese Advisory Committee.
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
There's, I mean, that Domingos Rebello show was absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah,
and then to walk into the museum in Figueira and see his contemporary, who did a portrait of him, it was just wow. This is like too cosmic.
Yeah.
So, what else do you see the museum contributing to the fabric, the culture, the the everythingness of living in the South Coast, which is finally on and up?
Yeah, I know. It seems good. It's such a big institution. I think for between Boston and Providence, this is kind of one of the bigger museums, not the biggest, between the two, and that it's a place where people in this area can go to learn something new, not just about the history here, about whale science, about conservation, about communities that live here. And I think, and you'll hear this from staff, from all of us here at the museum, is that, the goal is that, as I said before, is that you see yourself here, that you see this as a place where you are comfortable, where it is welcoming, and where that you also see your history, your face, your family there in front of you, and understand how it connects to all of the people still living here today, all the communities living in the South Coast today. And so I just feel like that is, and this is for all museums, right? That this is like having access to that and then being a place that feels like that to people. I mean, that's the goal. That's what you want. And to be able to share the collections and history and wonderful writings and interpretation from, Mary Jean, from others, from Mike, from other curators, to share all of that information with people, but then also invite people to kind of maybe rethink about what they might know or not know about what they think they're going to encounter at the Whaling Museum. That's kind of that's the place where we strive to be, right? And I think we're headed in that direction, and that's not only in exhibitions, that's in the programs that we do, that's in us being out in the community, right? Being present for there's so many different arts organizations in the South Coast, right? There's so many places where people can meet to talk and think and share what they're doing, that I feel like just being present in those discussions in that arena is super important and something that we will continue to do.
How about the new building? Has that coalesced a bit? I mean, at least you get a big lump of clay and you push it around a little bit, and are you starting to see a shape?
Yeah, we are. That is, in beginning stages and moving forward, and there's definitely plenty of fundraising happening for it, and planning, and thinking around schematics and what that will look like, and we're I think thinking about how that space again can lend itself to that welcoming idea I was talking about how you are coming into a place that wants you there and wants you to learn there. And that is a space where we can share even more kind of temporary exhibitions, have a space that lends itself to this idea of continuing to share things in our permanent collection that don't get shown very often, or don't get don't get to be on view as much. And then also, many ideas we may have around inviting artists and different culture bearers and communities in to help tell stories around New Bedford and the underlying themes of that we explore here at the museum.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the perfect, lack of a better word, excuse now to really showcase the contemporary. It's a perfect opportunity. That's a better word than excuse. It's a perfect opportunity to better showcase the contemporary, it really is a place where I feel, not just because I was born and bred here, but going in there, you discover a little bit about yourself. With my French Canadian side, with the textile history, I always go into the gallery where I hear that, that the throbbing of those, the shuttle and the loom gun.
Right. Yes.
And I'm saying, this is nothing like what it sounded like in the mill. I remember a visit. My father was a training instructor in the cotton division of Berkshire Hathaway, and I would go into the mill with him. The noise was deafening, absolutely deafening. And the people there had this pride of what company they were associated with, their craft. My father became a training instructor. And then, I go into another section and I start to see some of my Portuguese heritage. And then it's just the city overall. I mean, the city, when I meet people, I can't help but gush about the darn place. I mean, our friends and family in Detroit, and they're like, people so where are you from again? And I tell them, and it's, this where Frederick Douglass came to freedom in 1838. They're like, no way. I was like, yeah. And it's still going. We have Abolition Row, and the dynamism is just phenomenal. It's just absolutely phenomenal. I know you're up against the clock.
Right.
Yep. So, anything that we've left out that you would like to interject, and we'll just close it out.
Not really. I'm glad. I feel like we touched on a lot of things happening here, which is great.
We need another whole nother episode.
I know we do. And then, who knows what we were talking about the first time. It's not on here. Yeah. But I'm glad you mentioned Roy and just, that's up for another month and was a wonderful project to bring to fruition because it had been in the works before I got here. But to really see that home, and then to also we have a very busy schedule coming up in the summer, and we have a show called Wider World in Scrimshaw, and that again speaks to everything we just kind of talked about in kind of thinking a little more about the Scrimshaw collection that has been researched and interpreted and talked about quite a bit, but putting that in conversation with carving traditions and carvings from Indigenous communities across the Pacific and here at home, here in New Bedford. And so, just kind of hoping people keep up to date with us and follow us, and that we can be a place where they come to spend time.
Thank you. Don't go anywhere. I'm going to close this out. I'll be right back.
Okay, no problem.
Well, folks, that's we were on pins and needles. I was anyway. I don't know how about you, Ymelda, but just waiting for the other shoe to drop with technology. But we got through it. So, folks, thanks so much for joining us, and especially with our very special guest, Ymelda Rivera Laxton. We'd love to have her come back on the show because definitely we've only scratched this surface. That's for sure. And one thing, smile and be kind to each other out there. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.